my mind. And just as a psychic, just being in the town, and then also, as I read about these authors and moments from their lives, they just became so vivid in my mind. And I just felt the need to write them down. So I started to do that. And then as I did it, I began to get more of a sense of the story line, of a fictional story that I could use. And then, I think I say at a certain point, I decided to combine all of these in order to capture what it was I was feeling at that moment in my life, living in Concord at that time, as I had all this kind of information coming to me, and just the sort of images I had of Concord and of the past there. So that's what I set out to do. It turned into its memoir, in that I tell my own story as a writer and who has a psychic ability, and as I'm coming to terms with that ability, let's say. And then I wrote this fictional story where I have the writers from the past in Concord living as present-day characters. So I'm presenting this notion of, what do you think of it as past lives or parallel lives, or however one wants to think of it. That's the implications there. And within the fictional story, I show these characters going through some of the similar experiences that they had in the past, and then I will break into windows where I go into the past. So it's multi-layered, and it's an unusual book, but I've had some really wonderful reactions to it.
Well, I can't wait to read it. So I've been
and it's full of Concord history, in that, and it takes place. I let the storyline take place at all the historic homes in town, so you get the added element of all the history. So it's an unusual book, but it has a nice story.
Awesome. And so I've been practicing branded placement on the show, and I've been putting your book cover up. And I would like to know also, Catherine, what is your fascination with Henry David Thoreau?
My fascination with Thoreau? Yeah, I wanted to tell sort of the rest of the story of that, how that all came about. I think, I remember times in Michigan where I would see an image of Thoreau, like in a book from school, or I had an author's card deck at one point, and I remember I would pull out certain cards, and I swear he was one, and Hawthorne was one, and then Louisa May Alcott. And this is when I'm like 8 in Michigan, and I don't know anything about these writers or about Massachusetts, but I'm pulling them out, and it just seemed I was always going in that direction. But anyway, this recent work with Thoreau began in 2006, and that was I'm trying to think where to begin the story, but basically I joined the Thoreau Society around 2000, and I met Brad Dean, who was a major Thoreau scholar. He was somebody who had taken Thoreau's unfinished manuscripts, edited them, and published them, and so he'd become famous doing that. He was a great guy, and unfortunately, Brad died of a sudden heart attack in January of 2006. Now, he had been a mentor to me, and he had been friend, and I did a graduate program for a short time, and he was advisor to me for that program. So I knew him. We were close, and he died on the 14th of January. I had no idea until I saw him standing in my dining room about 10 days later. It was the 1-year anniversary of my mother's death. I was setting out a candle and her picture to kind of commemorate the 1 year, and I was connecting to her, going through my process of connecting, thinking I'm going to connect with my mother, and all of a sudden I connected to Brad, and I saw him, and it's hard sometimes to describe what that seeing is like, or what it is to connect that way, because it's almost like a trance. But if you say the word trance, it becomes this heavy-duty weird thing. It's really not like that. It's just sort of a focus. So I was very focused, and I was able to see it. And I saw him put his hands together kind of above his head and kind of bring them down. And I thought, what is he doing? What does that mean? And all of this it took place so fast. And then I kind of snapped out of it, and I went, I said to myself, why am I talking to Brad like I talked to my mom and dad? I mean, Brad's not dead. He can't be dead. And, I found out like 3 hours later that in fact he had died 10 days before. I went to a psychic that I actually called to make an appointment with a psychic named George, who I talk about in Honor and Conquer. He's somebody in Salem, Mass, who I've been seeing off and on for a while, like, I don't know, 6, 7 years. And so I called to make an appointment with George and found out that George had also died of a sudden heart attack, like 3 months before, which this was all just sort of like couldn't be happening. And then I got an appointment with his wife, Barbara, went in to see her, and during that reading, she connected me with Brad. She saw him making the same symbol above his head, and she told me that that meant he was going to draw his energies down to me.